Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hi, I'm Rory and welcome to episode 316 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I am delighted to catch up again with Catherine Knibbs, who is a psychotherapist specialising in cyber trauma, a term she coined to describe the psychological impact of negative online experiences such as cyberbullying, harassment and exploitation. With a background in child and adolescent therapy, she has become a leading voice in exploring how digital environments affect mental health. Catherine also is a researcher, speaker and author known for integrating neuroscience and trauma-informed approaches into her work. She advocates for greater awareness of the psychological risks of online activity and works to provide guidance on protecting the mental well-being in a digital age. Today, Catherine will be discussing a specific type of online harm that may appear harmless at first, but can lead children into an abusive online relationship. So if you're going to do nothing else today, have a good listen to this interview and make sure you share it widely. And with that said, let's get on with today's episode.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and a very warm welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast from myself, Ken Kelly, and of course from Rory Oakes. We're here together again for episode 316 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with three amazing topics, starting off with that ethical, sustainable practice, where we continue our chat around neurodivergence. And today, really, what is neurodivergence? And we're really going to be diving into seeing the person, not the label. We then move on to Practice Matters. That's the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. You're going to enjoy it today. It's an interesting topic. We have Catherine Knibbs, who is a regular guest here on the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Rory, you met up with her. As you've beautifully said within the introduction, an interesting topic of innocent online interactions that can lead to abuse. We're talking children and young people here, so an important topic. And certainly before you brought this up, Rory, and we discussed it, it was outside of my awareness, and I'm very glad that you brought that up. So it's a must-listen today in Practice Matters. And then, of course, we see you, our students. We move on to our student services. Such an important topic today. We're going to be talking about listening to understand, not listening to respond. So it's going to be a deep dive into active listening. And I think whether you're qualified or a student, this is an important topic and one that we should be revisiting often to check how our active listening is. But let's start off with that ethical, sustainable practice, Rory, where we're speaking about what is neurodivergence. And I guess with the slant on seeing past the label or the definition and recognizing that behind this is a person.
Absolutely, Ken. And I think you make a very, very good point, bringing that to awareness, because people aren't a series of labels where things are stuck on. However, therapists need to understand the the kind of panoply of the human condition and how it might impact on an individual's life. We spoke in episode 315 about what neurodivergence is. So if you want to listen to that, go to counsellingtutor.com, the podcast tab, episode 315, and there's a lovely introduction here. But we're going to be talking about really the key insights. And when people talk about neurodivergence, there is a kind of habit, if you like, of people thinking it only applies to people who are autistic or maybe people with ADHD. And the fact of the matter is, it's an umbrella. And it's an umbrella that encompasses a wide range of very personal experiences for clients. And I will give you some of the personal experience. It can be dyslexia. So, people who are dyslexic are, by a modern definition, neurodivergent, ADHD. And we could look at other things such as attention deficit hyperactivity. I'm going to try and drop the disorder from these, Ken.
Thank you, Rory.
I just don't think the disorders, being on the autism spectrum, although the official name is autistic spectrum disorder, but we should really drop the disorder. Dyspraxia, not being able to, motor skills, Tourette's syndrome, where people have maybe involuntary physical and vocal tics, and sensory processing differences. So heightened and reduced sensitivity to sensory inputs, as my dental hygienist will probably testify to, because I'm the worst patient when I have my teeth cleaned, just because of that. So we need to think about that. And what we also need to think about, and I think this is really important, is people can acquire neurodivergence. So what can happen is that you might get people who are born neurodivergent, and you might get people who've been in some form of accident or have maybe a brain tumor, and they acquire it, and they become neurodivergent by acquisition. So although we try not to label clients, having an understanding of the language allows us to get closer to the language, get closer to the client, and also be able to access their frame of reference. And that's what being a therapist is about, accessing someone's frame of reference and being able to see the world as they see it.
I like that. It keys into that active listening that we're going to be diving into in student services today, because that's what it's all about. It's an important topic, and you referred to last episode 315, where we spoke about the language of how we speak about this, why it's important for us to be looking at this as counsellors, as psychotherapists at this time. And today, maybe a little bit deeper dive. The term neurodivergence, coined by an Australian sociologist, and that's Judy Singer. And we've got a handout for you on this in the 1990s. And it refers to individuals who experience variations in brain function. So this is kind of a quote or a direct lift from how Judy described this, leading to difference in sociability, learning, attention, and mood regulation. As a neurodivergent man myself, diagnosed it's about 7 years ago, I can definitely relate to a lot of those words. And this is the important one. Neurodivergence is not a medical disorder, but a natural variation within the human population. And it's for that reason that I think you're right, Rory, the dropping of the D at the end of ADHD, with the D being disorder, ASD, autism spectrum disorder. I think that language is losing favor, as we mentioned last week, and will be replaced. So at the risk of us having to re-record our podcast every couple of weeks, we're going to drop the word disorder. But let's talk about some of the core characteristics that characterism types of neurodivergence, because neurodivergence, as you've kind of mentioned, encompasses a wide range of conditions, and each affecting individuals differently. And I think this is the main takeaway from what I've just said there. Wide range of conditions affecting individuals differently. And what we don't want to be doing as we kind of dive into this topic is forming a picture or a label that we go, oh, that person is neurodivergent, therefore they are likely to think like this, act like this, experience these challenges. It is very, very varied amongst individuals. And I guess that's why we say looking beyond the label and looking at the individual themselves. And of course, just a very brief overview. Autism spectrum, I'm not saying the D on there. Individuals on the autism spectrum often experience differences in social interaction, communication, sensory processing, may have very specific interests, may have, not will always have. And that's really important here. You know, there's one of the things that came up for me when I kind of disclosed, because it's kind of like coming out. In fact, it is coming out. When I was disclosed about my autism diagnosis, I shared with certain family members, and they said, well, you can't be. And then they started listing a whole load of traits that they saw in me that did not fit their label of autism. So they said, you can't be because X, Y, and Z. So one of them was that I worked for some time as an entertainer. So I was quite happy standing up in front of a group of 1,000 people and entertaining them and holding them in the palm of my hand. And they said, you know, you can't be autistic because an autistic person is very shy and is not socially interacting with people. And of course, that was maybe true for some, but certainly not for myself. And I know if we look to the media, there are many autistic individuals that are in the limelight, that are in the entertainment world, that are regularly speaking out on television to millions of people, at rock concerts to tens of thousands of people. Attention deficit hyperactivity condition is characterized by inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity, differing from societal norms. But again, there is a whole, I love the word spectrum, that sits within inside the spectrum of where you might find yourself. And it may change from day to day. Dyslexia, that's something I can certainly relate to from my earliest years. I remember I was probably about 4, started school in the United Kingdom at around about 4, and I remember we started getting basic words that we had to look at, and for me they just looked like weird patterns, and it was like everybody else had it. They were able to put these weird patterns in some kind of an order that said the cat sat on the mat. Me, I was just looking at these patterns going, what is this? And this learning challenge impacts reading, writing, spelling due to difference in how the brain processes that information. Dyspraxia, I relate to that as well, affects coordination, motor skills, leading to difficulties in movement and planning. I remember in my early years when you had to hold the bean bag and walk across the little bar on the ground. I couldn't do it. I kept on falling off. I can't stand on one leg to this day. I keep on falling over. Definitely dyspraxic in that area. Tourette syndrome, involuntary physical or vocal tics, sensory processing differences. Individuals may have heightened or reduced sensitivity to sensory inputs affecting their daily lives and functioning. So there's a very brief overview of what we might see when we refer to neurodivergence, but within there are literally millions and millions of people that might kind of either have a diagnosis or self-identify to any of those areas that we've covered under neurodivergence. But yet every single one of those person is unique, is different, and they are on their own journey. And that's the importance, is that we see the individual, not the diagnosis or not the neurodivergence first. Yet we still are respectful of neurodivergence in the way that we work. Rory.
Well said, Ken. But I was going to say bravo. I was going to give you a round of applause for that. But it's very true. And I'll just pick up on one of the things you said about being dyslexic. I am dyslexic as well, as all those people who've written into me in the past telling me my spelling's awful will attest to. And I don't have any problem with reading. I can read, no problem at all. But ask me to write anything. Well, when they say ask me to write anything down, ask me to use a pen and paper. And it's like my right arm where I hold the pen is completely disconnected from my brain. I write things down. By the time I get to the end of a sentence, it looks like a spider's become very ill and walked through an ink pot. That was a challenge through my school life. And, you know, if you talk about Tourette syndrome, what about this? When I was given an assessment, my wife said, well, I'm not really surprised. My lovely wife said, I'm not really surprised, Rory. She said, you know, when we were in our local town the other day, and I said, yes, shopping. She said, you were stood in the middle of a shopping centre. You were literally having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. And I said, was that? She said, you do it all the time. And when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking, actually, I do. Sometimes I might be thinking about a podcast and how I'm going to put, discuss the topics. And if I'm not careful, I can just get completely lost in that and start having a conversation with people. And of course, to those who are on the outside, this looks quite odd behaviour. And that, I think, probably would fall under the panoply of Tourette's to some extent. So it is. And I think the challenge for therapists is to acknowledge, and we, last week in 315, podcast 315, we did talk about affirming. So to acknowledge that people are different in the way that their thinking and processing goes, but to see the person behind it. And also, I think in some cases, to acknowledge the difficulties it brings. We're living in a more, I use the word kinder society, where individual differences are now being, individual differences are seen as quite the norm, and people are giving time and making adjustments for those individual differences. But still, it can be a challenge. And, I've worked with, I can think of at least a couple of clients who have struggled with either one or two different parts of neurodivergence because it wasn't particularly them, it was the people around them. And sometimes it's their family who, say very, very thoughtless things to them, like, you're a clumsy elf. That's no good to someone who's dyspraxic. Someone has difficulty with coordination and they knock the odd thing over. Calling someone a clumsy idiot, or you're flipping like a bull in a china shop, isn't helpful, because it's not something they can easily control, if it can control at all. So, yeah, I have worked before the term was even in my awareness, with people who've struggled with the way their brains were wired up, I guess, to give it a good example. So just to have a therapist who understands that and allows the space to talk about the challenge and what someone might want to do with it, I think is mightily helpful in therapy. So we don't have to give a label, but just give the space, listen, and understand that this is what it might be.
Yeah. And it's an interesting topic, because we spoke last time about how it's kind of, it almost seems like it's emerging at the moment. It's coming into its own, with more information being readily accessible, with the world being a much smaller place where we can speak on social media and we can identify with others and on their journey and have instant access to other people. But one thing that is interesting is looking to the statistics, and there is an estimated 15 to 20% of the population that would fall into neurodivergence that we're speaking about right now. And what I think, and what the evidence is kind of pointing to, is that is probably an underestimation. And it is an underestimation due to undiagnosis in women. So if we look back historically, this was there was a time when women could not be diagnosed as neurodivergent. It just wasn't. They just weren't having it. It was a male-only thing. Many neurodivergent individuals may be unaware of their neurodivergent status. They may have not seen that or recognized that. And I think these are important considerations for us as counselors and psychotherapists. We need to have a sensitivity to misdiagnosis. So a person who may not have recognized their own neurodivergent status may still have experienced pain and challenge within their lives that had taken them to healthcare professionals over the years. and they may have been misdiagnosed. In fact, there's a high incidence. The evidence points to a high incidence of misdiagnosis with anxiety, depression, personality disorders. So having this information out for us as counselors, knowing what to look for, what to be sensitive to, we can really aid somebody on their path if it is done sensitively. And of course, as we said in episode 315, and we're going to probably say it in each episode that we cover this topic, we're not here to diagnose. Diagnosis is a very formal process, and it's done by specialist individuals. We as counselors and psychotherapists are not there to diagnose, but we can signpost, we can help support someone who's maybe going through a diagnosis. And then, of course, if we do recognize that we are working with a client who is neurodivergent, it's about individual-centered approach. So there's no secret that Rory and I have a course that we built for Counselling Tutor on working specifically with autism. And the reason autism is because this is an area that Rory and I studied in. We did courses within this. We are neurodivergent ourselves, so we have our own journeys to kind of look at, but we also looked to what the resource says in building this training. And one of the sayings is, if you've met one autistic person, well, then you've met one autistic person, because that's it. If you met me, and I'm very proudly autistic, and then you met Rory a few days later, we're very different people. We've got different interests. We've got different ways of being. And the way our neurodivergence kind of shows in our life is different. So it's an individual-centered approach. It's tailoring the intervention to be unique and to the person's processing styles and sensory experiences. And it could include providing sensory accommodations or making it might be a quieter room, or adjusting the lighting, or changing our communication style to suit what is better for the client. And I think this is important, that when we train in the area of neurodivergence, what we don't learn is a model that is going to fit all people. We learn what to look for in order to be able to offer an individual approach to the people that are as unique as people are. And then, of course, we spoke last week about that inclusive language, how important the language that we use is, and how important it is to find what the preferred language is for the person that we're working with. That if they are on a road of neurodivergent a diagnosis, or they've been diagnosed, how do they choose to own that themselves? And these are just some considerations as we kind of go into this topic. And of course, we're going to cover it for a number of weeks, and we'll dive deeper and deeper as we go and kind of get a little bit more niche into some of the areas. But I think we should end with maybe some learning tasks, Rory. So learning tasks, and these are taken from the handout, and I'll tell you where to get the handout and the in-depth article on what Rory and I are talking about in a moment. Reflect on your attitudes towards neurodivergent individuals. If you take a moment and you think in your mind, what does an autistic person look like? How do they show up? What does that mean to you? And challenge that. Is that a stereotype? You know, when we're training, we learn about stereotypes and the danger of stereotyping that all Italians love pizza and anybody from Ireland loves drinking Guinness. You know, we move away from those stereotypes and we see people as individuals. So what does neurodivergence mean if you say it to yourself? And then maybe a learning exercise might be, consider, what are some of the challenges that neurodivergent clients may face within your sessions? And how could this impact their needs and the way that you might react to that? That's a big ask. I think for me, those kind of topics are a week of sitting and reflecting on them, Rory. And then maybe discuss experiences. If you've had experience in working with a neurodivergent client or clients, discuss that. Maybe discuss it with your supervisor. Consider what strategies you worked with. What did you do that worked? What did you do that you felt didn't work? And then finally, I guess, in learning is think about the language. What is the language you choose to use? If you're going to be writing on your website that you warmly welcome neurodivergent clients, have you trained in that? Do you understand it? Are you able to offer that? And then what is the language you might use to kind of bring that over? Any final thoughts on this, Rory?
Yes, I think that this is such an emerging cohort of clients that we're really only at the beginning of understanding what neurodivergence is. And I think that the learning isn't a one hit. So it's not, I've learnt about that, now I know all about it. I think that in the next 10 years, in the next decade, we're going to see more research. You're absolutely right, Ken. We're going to find that more and more people are in fact neurodivergent. So I think my message would be, it's a continuing professional development. I know we rattle on about this on the podcast all the time, but really in the work we do, we have to do continuing professional development. So one of the things about the courses that we build is that anybody who goes on them has access to them for life. So if we get anything new or any new research, we can actually add it in and people can come back to them. So it's not like going to a course where you get a load of handouts and that's it. It's a living document, a living course where people can go back into and have a look and look at anything that's been updated. And there will be updates and there will be changes and there'll be a continuing conversation because the neurodivergent community is a wide, broad church, and what we're not going to get is consensus on everything. So I think it's on us to keep informed, keep our learning up, and to realise that this is going to be something that's going to get a lot more prevalent in the years to come, and something that every therapist is going to encounter.
Beautifully said, Rory. So as we kind of come to the end of this topic, there is a number of actions you can take. Number one is go to the show notes for today's episode. You go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, find your way to episode 316. That's 316 right there. Within the show notes is going to be a link to a really nice in-depth article covering the topic Rory and I have spoken today. Within that article, there's an opportunity to download a handout. What is neurodivergence? It's what we've spoken about today, but it also has some really nice references at the end. So if you wanted to dig a little bit deeper, you can dig a little bit deeper into that topic. Secondly, on that handout are some learning activities. I covered them briefly. It's reflecting on your attitudes, considering the challenges, discussing experience working with neurodivergent clients, and thinking about language, where you kind of guided through those processes. If you wanted to kind of do a little bit of your own CPD in your own reflection time, that is in that handout. It'll be very, very useful for you. And then thirdly, we're speaking about neurodivergence and focusing specifically on autism. And this is because we have done the learning, we're looked to the research, and we've built training on this. If you're interested in our training course, I'm very delighted to say that the waiting list for this training course is now open, and you can join that by going to counsellingtutor.com. Just go to counsellingtutor.com. You'll see very easily where our training is. It's right there on the homepage. You'll be able to see that, and you're looking for the course Working Therapeutically with Autistic Clients. You can join that waiting list, and it will download you the course handbook, which will give you all the modules and topics that are covered. You can have a look if that is for you. And then when the course goes live, we will send you an email if you're on that on that waiting list to say that it's gone live, and you can make a decision of whether that fits into your current continuing professional development plans that you have for you within your practice. There it is. So that is, of course, ethical, sustainable practice, a little bit of a deep dive into what is neurodivergence and seeing beyond that label. And I guess now we move into Practice Matters, the CPD section. I say that each week, but I'm actually realizing, Rory, the whole episode is CPD.
The whole
really,
episode
isn't it?
CPD, isn't it? Yes.
Well, I guess what we mean is that this is where we bring people that are not Rory and not myself, Ken, in to speak about where they have an area of specialism or an expertise. And a returning guest, Catherine Knibbs. Rory, you met up with her on how seemingly innocent online interactions can lead to abuse of children and young people, a really serious topic and something I wasn't aware of, Rory.
Absolutely can. And what I would say to those people who are listening out there, if you do one thing today, once you've listened to Catherine Knibbs' interview, share it with your colleagues, share it with anyone who has children, share it in your professional social medias, because this is a real danger to children. I spoke with Catherine Knibbs, who's a human technologist. She specializes in how the internet and the use of social media can impact on individuals. And what she is about to share with you in this interview is absolutely mind-numbing and frightening. So, fair warning, it does contain themes of an adult nature, nothing too scary, but just as fair warning, have a listen to Catherine Knibbs about how innocent online interactions can lead to child abuse.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Today, I'm delighted to welcome back an old friend of the podcast and certainly a good friend of mine, Catherine Knibbs, who's a human behaviour technologist, who's going to talk about a child protection issue that might have slipped under the radar. So if you are listening to this, it's really important you take note, because this is so important. But Kath, it's delightful to see you, but just explain to us, what is a human behaviour technologist?
So this is now a new encompassing term that covers my work as a psychotherapist and author who's really at times pontificating, let's use that word, because that is kind of what I'm doing, really thinking about the way we use technology and why we use technology. And that stems from all of the work around psychology, psychotherapy, and in a space of technology, why we are all changing as human beings. And of course, that's really what we're going to get into in terms of the conversation today. But it's really about how and why we're now changing our behaviours in and around the world of technology, which includes those dreaded phrases, smartphones, social media, and so on.
Sending shivers down my spine, Kath. And the reason for this podcast is I was looking at my LinkedIn profile, and you came on the timeline, and you made a little video, and the video said, and I paraphrase here, I cannot believe I had to explain to a social worker why someone, a stranger, requesting a picture of a child's feet was a child protection issue. And I looked at that and I thought, we've got to know more about this. So what's going on? What's going on here?
So I think in all of the years that I've talked to you, Rory, I have moved from working primarily with children who might have been sent or appeared in my therapy office with lots of different issues. And I started to specialise in the space of child sexual abuse in the early 2010s and 2011, that kind of era. And what happened from that time is I ended up in the space of what we now refer to as something called technology assisted or technology facilitated child sexual abuse. This is also known as online coercion. There's many, many names and many, many acronyms. And I'm literally, and I say literally, just back from Slovenia and Croatia. This is a global issue that we are dealing with. And this particular issue, when we talk about it today, is one where, yes, the video does start with, I can't believe I've had to say to a social worker, but this is based on something that I was dealing with in 2014. I then went on to write about it in my sexual harms book, which came out in 2023. It's still an ongoing issue. And we're really talking about safeguarding thresholds, even though they're not often referred to as that, safeguarding thresholds that are currently being missed by professionals who work with children in this space of online facilitated, coercive child sexual abuse.
Yeah. So on the face of it, a child speaking to a professional and saying, someone's asked for a picture of my feet or my hands, may seem innocuous, may seem not to switch on the alarm bell. Someone says, want a picture of me declothed with no clothes on, immediate alarm bells going off. But pictures of hands and feet, they seem on the face of it so innocuous. But what is going on there? Why should professionals who work with children, indeed parents, I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of parents listening to this, be worried about this?
So let's address what you talked about there in terms of currently in the space of education at the moment. We are really saying to children, do not share nude images. Okay. Now, nudes are quite easy to understand exactly what they are. And what we generally do is we'll use analogies such as the swimsuit area. Don't share pictures where you might wear a swimsuit. And of course, depending on the kind of swimsuit, whether it's trunks or a swimming costume or a tankini, that can be a confusing way to describe things to children anyway. But what we're effectively talking here about feet is images that are not illegal to send. Now, a child sexual abuse image is any image that is classified as sexually present. I'm trying to be very careful how I say this because it can be really scary. The nomenclature can be really confusing for people. So what I want to say is anybody under the age of 18 that shares images of their genitalia or for females, their breasts, that is classified as child sexual abuse imagery, and that is absolutely illegal to send. It is illegal to ask for. It is illegal to take a picture of yourself in that way. And we are in a society where there are certain platform applications that allow for the sharing of these images, which we often refer to as intimate images. Now, the thing about feet and hands and elbows and necks and ears and all the other areas that we might classify as non-sexual, they are not illegal to take or send or have on your own phone. But what really, so what the video pertains to, and it's on all my social media channels in terms of the way that I'm trying to educate people around this, it's normally asked for a coercive reason. And I call that video the feet pick pipeline. And in this instance, the young people are generally well aware of what they've been asked to send. It's a picture of feet. They're often given a monetary reward. So, of course, what child wouldn't want to get a monetary reward for sending something that isn't breaking the law? And it isn't, if you follow the law or rules of sending nudes. I'm not sending a nude, therefore I'm not, let's do the air quotes, doing anything wrong. However, what happens with the perpetrators of crimes against children is often that's the first image that then becomes the leverage for something we call sextortion. And sextortion is blackmail around sexual abuse imagery. And what can happen in terms of, let's talk a psychological process here, that in the first instance, the child is empowered, they send an image of their feet, they feel like they are in control. And at the point of sending the image, the power play changes and the perpetrator now holds the power by being able to say, send me some more or send me some pictures that are further up the leg. And that means they can start to gain money for the transaction. but the power play is in the hands of the perpetrator, who will ask for more and more explicit images. And that starts to take us into a conversation about the conferences I've just been around. And I think it's important, Rory, that we talk about some figures. And I think the best way to explain this is figures that are collected by an organisation called the National Centre for Exploited and Missing Children, known as NCMEC, over in the US. And they are the organisation that gets the reports from tech industries and sometimes direct from children. And the numbers of reports that they received last year were in the region of 32,000 reports. And those reports are often of more than one image or video. Often they relate to websites. And it totaled somewhere in the region of 800,000 images that were collected last year as reports. And of course, that's not every image that's reported. So when we start to think about these figures, we are in a very, very scary landscape. I understand this. And when I talk about this in these terms, it's likely to make it's likely to be heard in a way that goes, oh my goodness, that's absolutely irresponsible of technology and irresponsible of children to be sending these images. I want to emphasise, more often than not, it is a coercion. It is a coercive type of relationship where these images are requested and sent. And unfortunately, we also live in a world where intimate images are then shared non-consensually. So images are being traded, they are being stored, shared, sold, used like Pokemon cards often. And the reason they are collected in this particular way is because there is a large demand for this of perpetrators of crimes against children, of sexual abuse imagery.
So just hearing those figures, this is grooming on an industrial scale, sophisticated,
yes,
well rehearsed. I'm going to use the word thoughtfully, well executed. In other words, there's a process for doing this, and part of that process is acclimatization by degree. It starts off with something innocuous like feet or hands, and then, as you say, the power switches over to the perpetrator. And of course, if there's a monetary reward involved in this, then that can be used as an inducement to ask for other more inappropriate images and worse, I would imagine.
And also to influence said children to recruit others. So now we're talking about, so I often, when I'm talking to children, when I talk in this space, this is a business model. This is about recruitment of as many participants as possible. And, we are in a time and space where images are now being utilised by AI systems. So actually, even the provision of an image with a full set of clothes on can be undressed by AI. And there is currently a huge issue with this in South Korea. So there's been and I have a social media video around that one as well. We now exist in a time when you don't even need to share images like this anymore. It can actually be done via an AI app that can undress you. So if we think about the reasoning behind this, it can often be revenge, done for a laugh, sent because somebody won't send an image. And it's a real space we have to think about, particularly as child practitioners, as parents. Are we having conversations about the conversations that children engage with people online? So it's not always about, are you sending nude images? It's not even about, has anybody ever asked for a picture of your feet? It's, has anybody ever asked for an image that you're uncomfortable about? Have you ever been threatened that somebody would share an image? Do these conversations take place? And yes, they are taking place, Rory, as you've said, on an industrial scale. There are books being sold by perpetrators on how to do this. And this space at the minute of sextortion is and has very, very sadly resulted in a number of children taking their own lives, because the shame around this particular issue is so deeply held, and the wound is so quickly created. And this is a time of crisis on one hand, but it's also a time of us understanding the issue so we can begin to ask the questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we hear that. I mean, I'm hearing that loud and clear. And I guess one of the confounding things about this is that in the mainstream, the mainstream media has recently reported that the actor, I believe she's now an actor and singer, Lily Allen, has an OnlyFans page where she's selling images of her feet to people who might, just have a kink around that. I mean, we're not trying to demonize anybody who has a particular interest in feet, but I guess what strikes me is that the spirit of the age, where people can monetize parts of their body and do well with it, then is picked up by young people. I'm sure there'll be lots of young women, and we talk about women, but this could affect young boys as well, young men as well. And I'm sure that someone thought, well, Lily Allen's selling pictures of her feet. Why can't I do that? And yeah.
And in most cases, until you start to go through puberty, feet are genderless.
Oh yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, they only become defined as you develop into an adult, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I will say that, that hairs on the toes doesn't necessarily define what gender you are anyway, but it's moreover, apart from the size of feet, and I'm not into shaming kink. So this has been certainly on the Instagram page. I've had some really good conversations where people have said, this is monetization by children. So on the scale of it sounds like it's adults exploiting children, but what you've just talked about there are some young children, and this was the conversation that I talked about in the book, is the child who I worked with who was selling her images at the beginning, her feet images, was doing it for monetary gain and was completely aware as to what would happen after the images had been sent. And I'm going to leave it there for people to use their imagination.
Join the dots. Yes. Yeah. So that's another difficulty, isn't it? And I think it's a good time to remind ourselves, because goodness gracious, we've had to have this conversation so many times. We've discussed it so many times. Children cannot consent to their own abuse, and I think in the past, hearing you speak about that, somebody might say, well, they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. No, that's completely wrong. Children cannot consent to their own abuse, and I think that mindset really needs to be concreted in, because I think sometimes in the conversations I've had, not with therapists, but in a general conversation, it might come up. Yeah. It's amazing how many people still believe in the idea that children can consent, and of course then that becomes somehow their fault when it all goes wrong. There's a blaming culture there. Well, you did it. You know what you were doing. You were charging money. What do you expect? But that's not right, is it?
Absolutely not. And certainly this is the thing really that I've been in, or I am in this space around at the moment, is talking around children's development, understanding children, and also the kinds of cyber traumas that they have when this occurs, because generally we would, in these instances, victim blame in terms of because we're trying to find a way to deal with the issue, and more often than not, the way that we deal with the issue at the minute is through lack of understanding, which, this is why we're having this conversation. Yeah. And in terms of kind of the counsellors and psychotherapists that are listening, what questions are, flying through your mind at the minute about what you can ask young people in your therapy practice that will take you into this space? And then what do you know about the actions that you are going to follow, required to follow, need to follow, or should follow, given the lack of understanding around sexual-based issues or cyber-based issues to date at the minute, because this is, as I've alluded to, the crisis of our time, and very little is known about it outside of maybe police services. But again, when we're talking about pictures of feet, it wouldn't actually create. I mean, think about trying to make a safeguarding referral to social care direct and picking up the phone and saying, "Hi, I've got little Amy. She's been sending pictures of her feet." Unless you know who the other person is or what was requested, it sounds innocuous, doesn't it? Pictures of her feet. Well, what's the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I suspect those heinous people who carry out this type of activity in the dark corners of the internet know exactly that would be the response from a lot of people. So just as a call to action, just for those people, they may be parents, they may be people engaged in child protection, they may be just lay people who've just stumbled across the podcast and come across this. And if you have, you're very welcome. Or if you're a practitioner working with children, what do we have to do? What do we have to be aware of? What do we have to do if we believe that this is a thing? And it's also, that's two questions. You never do two questions as an interviewer. But the second question is, how do we educate young people? So the first question is, what do professionals do or parents do to equip themselves to be aware of this phenomena?
So again, there's little training around pictures of the feet pic pipeline. There is plenty of sites that you can visit around what's commonly referred to as TASCA within the United Kingdom. That's the technology assisted child sexual abuse. So one of the organisations I work with, and I really do appreciate their work, is the Marie Collins Foundation. And I've worked with them for some time in terms of helping them with the resources, but they have a brand new free to download for any kind of issue resources list that you can go to their website for. So if you're working with a child who might have shared one of their images, bearing in mind you need to understand the route with which you can help children protect themselves. So I'm going to suggest that you really pop down, whether it's on your phone or on your notes or wherever. There is a tool in the United Kingdom called Report Remove, or there is a global one called Take It Down. And Take It Down is a service that allows children themselves to report an image that is of this ilk. Generally, they tend to be sexual ones, and no information about the child is taken, no personal information about the child is taken. It is literally to take that image and get what's called a hash on it, because the hash prevents that image from being uploaded to social media channels. Okay. Oh. So it really is, this technology is absolutely phenomenal, Rory, in terms of being able to put a unique identifier onto an image so that it cannot be uploaded in terms of on social media sites. The same with Report Remove. That will also do it the same in terms of these lists that they provide to social media companies. I could get geeky on the technology, but I won't. I would certainly say there are websites for if you believe the child you're working with has potential harmful sexual behaviour. So that would be through organisations like the Lucy Faithfull Foundation. And if you are looking for knowledge, assistance, conversations with law enforcement, you can have a look at CEOP, you can have a look at the NSPCC website, you can look at ChildNet, you can look at Internet Matters, Get Safe Online. There are lots of internet safety companies that will give you advice about routes of action, things you can do. But as a psychotherapist, I can tell you now, aside from the books that I've been writing, there is no literature on this to date. There might be small amounts of research articles, but really we're in a phase where this isn't part of a standard child training route to understand all of the issues that exist online. But it is listed in Working Together to Protect Children. So this is Working Together 2023. It was also in 2018 that forms of abuse that we report that take place in the real world also exist online, such as viewing pornography, sexual abuse and sexual images, intimate image sharing, intimate image abuse. And yet there is still no direct legislation or anything for us to do as practitioners. So it's a complicated space. I would certainly say verse yourself in as much information as you can about internet related issues, and really start to understand the social media platforms such as Snap, which is what the children call it. You will know it as Snapchat as a grown-up adult because that's the way that it's talked about by children. Learning what Discord is, learning where files and can be shared on the apps and the kinds of ways in which information is shared and disappears, etc., etc. But also talking to children about what they have on their phone. Who do they talk to? What apps do they use? And thinking about it in a way that any child under the age of 13 should not be on any social media platform because that's against data protection. But we know that children do use those platforms. They might be old enough to use Roblox, for example. They might be 7 or 8 and the parents have allowed them on Roblox, but actually these conversations take place on gaming systems like that. So really getting yourself versed in technology, the spaces children use, and no, you won't break it. And if you don't sign up as a 9 or 14-year-old child, you will not come across this information. So, don't sign yourself up as a 10-year-old child on Roblox because that's just a bit weird and probably would get you into trouble. But certainly go and use the platforms, go and have a look at where it is the children are going in terms of online and learn about the systems.
Yeah, and it's just the sort of things that my parents would do when I was a kid. We didn't have the internet, but people would find out where we were hanging around and what we were doing. And, you're at the corner shop, you're the people trying to buy, cider underage. And people would look out and people would say things. So I think that's really useful. Kath has mentioned a lot of resources. And what we're going to do, this is so important, I'm going to put links into the show notes page. So if you go to counsellingtutor.com, you'll see the podcast. If you go down to episode 316, you'll see within the podcast show notes there's going to be some links that you can go to. And I would say please share this podcast as widely as you can to parents, to to professionals, to other therapists, because this is a thing that, as you say, Kath, it went under my radar, and until if I hadn't have stumbled upon your LinkedIn post, it would have never come to the surface. So let's get some awareness, and I guess it just goes for me to say, Kath Knibbs, thank you so much for the work you do, and thank you for joining us.
Wow, a really sobering interview there, Rory. Thank you very much to Catherine Knibbs for returning, sharing the knowledge with us. And thank you to you as always, Rory. You're holding those important discussions and bringing us the experts in the field that change perhaps how we look and act within our practice. So that is Practice Matters, and we back out of Practice Matters, and we now look to our future counsellors and psychotherapists. Yes, you, the students. You're on your formal studies to become a counsellor or a psychotherapist, and we recognise you with Student Services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting, and it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counsellingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at, gain the competence, and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counsellingskillsacademy.com. And today in Student Services, listening to understand, not listening to respond. What do we mean by that, Rory?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I think what we mean by that is that it's how we are taught from very young children to listen and respond. If you've got children, if you look at your child's English literature specifications or the things they learn, they talk about listening and responding. And what we're not taught is listening to understand. So if you're listening to respond, you're listening so that you can gain information to put a response. So politicians are terribly good at this. If anybody who listens to Question Time, that's here in the UK, where the leaders of the opposition and the government debate matters of the day. It's usually done on a Tuesday morning in the UK here. You'll find that there's lots of listening to respond. So someone will put something to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister will say, aha, well, you're saying that, but actually there's this, and this. There is no listening to understand. In other words, that gap where people go, I can actually see where you're coming from here. And it speaks to empathy. We're taught from very young children. I'm sure they're doing a great job in schools. I don't want to give schools a hard time or teachers a hard time. But we're taught to respond. In other words, we're taught to give answers to questions, as opposed to looking a little deep, looking at the music behind the words, and maybe connecting the emotion of what's said to how we respond to someone. And I think it's a big challenge for counselling students, especially if you're going in level 2 or entry levels, being respectful to our friends in Scotland. They have a slightly different qualification level in Scotland. But if you're going into your first training, your introduction course, what I used to hear and what I did myself as a student was listening to responding. In other words, I'd be giving solutions and answers and rescuing, as opposed to actually listening to understand, listening to try to gain a real understanding of where this person is coming from. And I think the best listeners, and if anybody's doing any leading, if you're leading, you've got a team, the best listeners are those who listen to understand, not to respond, not to give solutions straight away, to try and understand where the person's coming from. And it can be a bit of a challenge because our society values listening to respond, I think, a little bit more than listening to understand.
Yeah. Well, you're 100% right. It's so often, if somebody is speaking, what's really happening is we're relating what they're saying to our lives, our experiences, how that impacts something that we've maybe experienced or some advice that we could give. And it's, as you say, it's not active listening. It's listening to respond. And very often, quite early in the interaction. So the person is talking and they might say a paragraph of sentences, but quite often by the end of the first sentence, listening has stopped, because the person the person who is listening to respond is just waiting for the gap to jump in and say how that relates to them, or what that person should do, or ask them, have they tried this or have they tried that, as opposed to listening to each and every single word of the person. Now, if you can see this within yourself, then that's okay, because it's pretty normal. And active listening it's like a muscle. We need to flex it, we need to work it, we need to work on it to be able to actively listen. We'll give you some exercises as we come to the end of this that you can use to flex your active listening muscle, to listen to understand rather than to listen to respond. But it's very, very rare. Yet, and this is so important, if you think of a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, up to 90%, listen to that number, up to 90% of a counselling session can be spent actively listening. And that active listening can be incredibly therapeutic without responding, without saying a word, just actively listening. Because in the way that we say that it is rare in the world that we might actively listen, that means that it's rare that people are truly listened to, that they are truly heard for everything that they bring, the wholeness of their person, the wholeness of that individual. And I looked to Carl Rogers, A Way of Being, that's Houghton Mifflin, 1980, page 116. It says, active listening means seeing the entire presentation of the speaker. So we're talking not just about the words that that person is saying. We're looking further than that. We are listening to the tone of their voice. We're looking to see if there's anything that shows within their body language. Are they clenching their jaw, for example, or wringing their hands? How are their shoulders placed when they're sitting within that chair? That's all part of them messaging to us, because, of course, body language is so important. And then, of course, we have the posture, eye contact, and their gaze. Where are they looking? Are they looking at you? Are they looking away? So much of how the client is within the room is part of that active listening, really taking in the wholeness of this client and truly being there. And I think it all comes together beautifully, Rory, by this quote by Carl Rogers. When I've been listened to and when I've been heard, I'm able to reperceive my world in a new way and go on. The man himself, Carl Rogers.
Yeah, he just has a way of putting it into perspective, Carl Rogers, doesn't he? And he really does, And I rattle on about this seemingly week on week, but the curative factor in therapy, it's been kind of known for a long time, is the relationship between the client and the counsellor. If it's a good relationship, trusting relationship, one that's boundaried and contracted, and the client understands the limits of confidentiality, then the client can speak about those things he can't speak about anything else. You can't speak to anyone else about. And you're right, Rogers was absolutely right. It's that what he's talking about is that taking that load off your back, putting that heavy bag down of the difficulties you've been carrying and letting, for a time, someone else carry it for you, or at least sharing the load. And that listening to understand it keys so much into that, because as humans, we all want to be understood. You hear it now, don't you? I really like that person because they get me. That's kind of come into the language, hasn't it? Someone gets me. And what someone really means is they understand who I am. They understand my little idiosyncrasies, that my ways of being, the way I am, and they accept me for that. They get me. And that is the secret of listening to understand. It's about the person being listened to, feeling validated and feeling like, quite frankly, someone cares.
Oh, yes. And nothing says I care more than really, truly listening and being there for that person. And 3 things we'd like to leave you with as we come near the end of this topic. The first is, you know that if you listen to the podcast often, that Student Services is sponsored by CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. Now, that's a little side project of mine. And it's because I love counselling skills, and I believe that once that door closes, all the theory and everything stays outside, and you're in there with a client, and all that you have is your skills, whether you're working online or whether you're in person with the client. And I've made a lesson from Counselling Skills Academy available for free for all our podcast listeners. You can get it in the show notes, or just go to CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com, and it's right there on the homepage. And it is a video on active listening. It's a little lecture it's only 8 minutes on active listening. But what makes it special is there's then a 3-minute demonstration of active listening. Now, Rory, where have you seen that before? Where have you seen a demonstration of active listening on a video? We think that that's something we do with the ears, but it's there for you. So if you want that, go to counselingskillsacademy.com. Just scroll down on that screen. You'll see it's there. You just click on it, put your email address that you want that lecture sent to, and we'll send it through to you. So that's the one thing. The next thing is I wanted to share with you SOLER, SOLER. It's a little acronym that you can use for active listening, specifically in counselling. And the S in SOLER is sit facing the person. So nothing says I'm listening to you and I'm receptive to what you have to say than actually you're posturing towards that person. O of SOLER. So you've got the sit facing, the S. The O is open your body position. Be aware, am I guarding? Am I folding my hands? Is there anything that is blocking me from this client? And if you're working online, that might be a microphone. Have you got a big microphone in the way of you and the client? If you watch any of our podcast videos that I know Charlie puts out on social, you'll see we got big microphones in front of us. But I wouldn't work with this microphone if I was working with a client because it closes my body position. It's a guard between us. So that's the S and the O. The L is lean forward to some extent. Be careful with this one. You don't want to overdo it, but you want your posturing to be open and leaning slightly towards. It shows a receptiveness to the person. The E is for eye contact, but there's an important caveat with eye contact. It is eye contact where appropriate. Eye contact's not always appropriate. We said that part of active listening is seeing the whole of the person, and part of that is where is their eyes. So if they're looking to us, then of course we're going to make eye contact. If they're purposely avoiding eye contact with us, then we can do the same and only occasionally touch eye contact when it feels appropriate. And the R in SOLER, I love, it's relax and just be comfortable within it, because we can't really be actively listening if I'm going, right, the S is I've got to sit facing them and I've got to open body position and I've got to lean forward a bit. If we're thinking about how we're positioning ourselves, how we're posturing ourselves, what skill we might use next, then we're not actively listening. We're then ready to we're ready to respond, as opposed to just listening to that person in their entirety. So what can you do? You can go to counselingskillsacademy.com. You can go and get that free lecture on that and see a demonstration of active listening. Within our show notes, counselingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 316. All the links will be there, including the link to an article on listening that we've covered today. And then want to end with how can you practice your active listening. Any interaction where somebody is speaking to you, you have an opportunity to actively listen. Next time you're at the store, instead of going through the checkouts where you self-checkout, go to a real person, and as they're checking you out, saying, how's your day today? And really listen to what they say. When somebody speaks to you, give it a try and see how often you really actively listen, if you make it a mindful activity. And a great way of kind of bringing that together and crystallizing it is journal about it. Journal about the interactions you had within the day. I can have interactions and I can say, I was speaking to my wife today, but I noticed that for maybe 80% of that, I wasn't actually there. I wasn't actively listening the whole time. It's okay. It's okay. I'm not punishing myself. I'm just recognizing it. I might have another interaction where I can say, wow, I was really connected with that person, really felt that I was absorbing what they were saying. And I feel that I really, truly heard them. What was the difference in how I was within those two interactions? That's great stuff for a journal, that is. It really is, Rory.
Absolutely. And maybe just reflects on how you've been listened to. Are you listened to regular basis? Do people listen to understand you, or are they just busy tapping their mobile phones or looking at their watches or making you feel like you're a little bit of a mild inconvenience? I think certainly in our house we have times where we will sit and listen. So we both myself and my wife live busy lives, but we will come together to sit and put time aside to listen to each other's concerns or worries or anything really, and we found that works. It's a bit like, it's not like a therapy session, although it can feel therapeutic, but just to set the time aside, and switch your phone off, make sure there's no one knocking at the door, and just spend some time trying to understand the other person's point of view. And and I think it's well worth doing, and it's a great feeling to be listened to. I've never met anybody who's been really listened to who's come away not feeling at least validated, or you don't have to feel better, but at least validated and understood. It's a great thing for a human being to feel.
I'm going to say it one last time. Quote from Carl Rogers: "When I've been listened to and when I've been heard, I'm able to re-perceive my world in a new way and go on." This has been episode 316 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. The National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, or NCPS, proudly sponsor this podcast, supporting students every step of the way. Join the NCPS for resources, training, and a friendly, knowledgeable community to enhance your learning experience. Visit ncps.com.
Yes, we started off in ethical, sustainable practice, and we talked about what is neurodivergence. We talked about the panoply of presentations that can inform neurodivergence, and we've dropped the disorder. And we also mentioned that once you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person. We're a wide group of people, all very different, and we should be treated in that way. We should be treated as individuals, not a diagnosis. And if you want a handout from that, if you go to Counselling Tutor Podcast, go to counsellingtutor.com, go to episode, go to the podcast tab, find episode 316. You can download the handout, and there's lots more information there. In Practice Matters, I talked to my good friend and, quite frankly, quite a genius in this field, Catherine Knibbs, talking about how seemingly innocent online interactions can lead to child abuse. As I said in the introduction, make sure you share that widely. Make sure that your colleagues, your peers, anybody hears that, because it is so important. And as you hear in the interview, something that is literally going under the radar. So we need to raise awareness of that. So please share it widely. And then in student services, Ken and myself talked about listening to understand, not listening to respond, making sure that the person who speaks to you is understood and validated. And before we leave today, if you're listening on one of the podcast apps, be that iTunes or Podchaser, why not leave us a review? Ken and myself love a nice review, and that would be lovely. So my plea to you today is, why not give us a little review and tell us what you think of our efforts today. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.